Hey guys, tonight we begin not with an emperor or a philosopher, but with something far more complicated and awkward: dating in ancient China. Because believe it or not, finding love in a time of arranged marriages, foot binding, and strict Confucian ethics was somehow even more nerve-wracking than accidentally liking someone's photo from 2016 while scrolling through their Instagram. From matchmaker negotiations to marriage by horoscope compatibility, ancient Chinese romance was less about sparks flying and more about ancestral approval and whether your birth year matched theirs according to the zodiac. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's drift back to ancient China, where finding love was less about swiping right and more about your grandmother consulting an astrologer about your future spouse's birth year. Imagine you're standing in a traditional Chinese courtyard during the Han Dynasty, around 100 CE. The morning mist clings to the carefully manicured rock gardens. A few birds chirp softly in the distance, and somewhere a young woman is learning that her parents have found her a husband she's never met. This isn't cruelty, this is care, or at least that's how families saw it. In ancient China, love wasn't something that struck like lightning in a marketplace. It was something that grew slowly, like bamboo, carefully tended and nurtured through shared rituals, mutual respect, and hopefully some genuine affection along the way. The concept of romantic love existed, of course. Chinese poetry is filled with longing, passionate verses about separation and reunion. But personal desire was always balanced against family harmony, social stability, and what the I Ching might have to say about your compatibility. Young people didn't date in the modern sense. They didn't go for walks alone, share meals unchaperoned, or exchange personal letters. Instead, they participated in an elaborate system of arranged meetings, formal introductions, and heavily supervised interactions that could take months or years to unfold. If you were a young man of marrying age, your parents would begin consulting matchmakers when you reached your early 20s. These weren't casual conversations, they were serious negotiations involving family lineages, birth charts, financial arrangements, and sometimes even the alignment of your ancestors' burial sites. The matchmaker, often an older woman with an excellent memory for family trees and personality quirks, would visit households carrying information like a human database. She knew who was available, who was wealthy, who was kind, and who had a tendency to drink too much rice wine at family gatherings. Families would exchange basic information first: age, education, family background, and then, if things looked promising, they might arrange for the young people to catch a glimpse of each other at a festival, family gathering, or temple ceremony. These weren't dates, they were inspections, gentle and polite, but inspections nonetheless. Young women had even less freedom than men. They were often secluded in the inner quarters of family compounds, learning domestic skills, poetry, calligraphy, and music. Their world was smaller, but not necessarily simpler. They had to master the art of a subtle communication, reading between lines and expressing personality within very strict boundaries. And yet, within these constraints, real affection did bloom. Couples found ways to communicate through poetry, shared glances during family meals, and small gifts passed through servants. The restriction didn't kill romance. It made it more precious, more carefully cultivated, like a rare flower grown in a protected garden. The goal wasn't just to find someone attractive, it was to create a harmony that would last decades, someone who would honour your parents, care for your children, and maintain the family's reputation long after the initial excitement had settled into something deeper and more stable. It was a system built on patience, duty, and the belief that love could be learned as much as felt. And while it might seem strange to modern hearts, There's something almost meditative about the way these ancient families approached one of life's most important decisions, with ritual, care, and generations of accumulated wisdom. In ancient China, your love life wasn't your own. It belonged to your family, and they took this responsibility very seriously. Your parents didn't see arranged marriages as limiting your freedom. They saw it as ensuring your happiness in the most thorough way possible. The family patriarch, usually the father or grandfather, would initiate marriage discussions, but the actual negotiations were often handled by women, mothers, aunts, and professional matchmakers who understood the delicate social dynamics involved in joining two family lines. These matchmakers were remarkable figures, part detective, part diplomat, part fortune teller. They maintained mental catalogues of eligible young people across entire regions, knowing not just who was available, but who would complement whom personality-wise, financially, and astrologically. When a family decided their child was ready for marriage, they would invite a matchmaker for tea, and the conversation would begin with seeming casualness. "Oh, how is the Wang family's second son doing with his studies? Has the Zhou daughter recovered from her illness last spring?" But beneath the polite small talk, serious evaluation was happening. The matchmaker was assessing the family's wealth, their reputation, their expectations, and their child's temperament. Was this a family that prized scholarship, military service, artistic accomplishment? What kind of match would bring them honour and stability? If the matchmaker believed she had a suitable prospect, she would approach the other family with equal care. "Oh, I happened to think of your son when I met this lovely girl from a scholarly family. She plays the qin beautifully, and her calligraphy is quite refined. Her family would be very pleased to meet your son at the Autumn Moon Festival." These weren't blind dates, they were careful orchestrations designed to let families observe each other's character, wealth, and social standing without anyone losing face if things didn't work out. The young people might not even realise they were being evaluated. Families would arrange to attend the same temple festivals, market days, or seasonal celebrations, positioning themselves so the potential couple could see each other from a distance. Parents would watch their child's reaction. Did their son seem interested? Did their daughter blush and look away? Or did she seem unimpressed? If initial impressions were favourable, the families might arrange a more formal meeting, usually in one family's home, with both sets of parents present. The young people would be introduced. They might share tea. Perhaps the young woman would play music or demonstrate her calligraphy. The young man might recite poetry or discuss his studies. Throughout these meetings, the real negotiation was happening between the parents and matchmaker. They were evaluating not just the young people, but each other. Could these families work together harmoniously for decades? Were their values aligned, their expectations reasonable, their financial situations compatible? The matchmaker earned her fee by ensuring compatibility on every level. Not just physical attraction, but family harmony, social standing, and practical considerations, like whether the bride's family could provide an adequate dowry and whether the groom's family could support her properly. This process could take months. Families might meet several times before reaching a decision, and sometimes years might pass while they waited for the right match. The goal wasn't speed, it was thoroughness, because once families were joined through marriage, they would be connected for generations. And while young people had limited choice in the process, they weren't entirely powerless. They could express preferences subtly, and families genuinely wanted their children to be content. A miserable marriage reflected poorly on everyone involved, so most parents tried to find matches that would bring both duty and affection. It was a system that valued collective wisdom over individual impulse, and while it might seem controlling from a modern perspective, there's something almost soothing about the idea that finding love was a community effort, shared responsibility rather than a lonely personal struggle. In a world where young men and women couldn't speak freely or spend time alone together, romance required creativity, and ancient Chinese culture developed an elaborate language of subtle communication that was as complex as it was beautiful. Poetry became the primary vehicle for expressing feelings that couldn't be spoken aloud. Young scholars would compose verses about plum blossoms or autumn leaves that were really about longing and desire. Young women would embroider handkerchiefs with symbolic flowers, each bloom carrying a different message about their feelings. The Chinese literary tradition is filled with metaphors that allowed lovers to communicate safely. Chrysanthemums for faithfulness, peonies for honour, bamboo for resilience, lotus flowers for purity. These weren't just decorative choices, they were a coded language that anyone educated in classical literature could read. Gift-giving became an art form in itself. A young man might send a piece of jade carved with a particular design, or a fan painted with specific birds or flowers. Each choice carried meaning, and the recipient would spend time deciphering the message with her maids or female relatives. Calligraphy was another avenue for expression. The way someone formed their characters, the choice of poems to copy, the style of brushwork, all conveyed personality and mood. A hastily written note suggested passion, while carefully formed characters indicated respect and thoughtfulness. Music played a crucial role as well. Young women of good families were expected to master instruments like the chin, a 7-stringed zither, or the pipa, a lute-like instrument. Certain melodies were associated with specific emotions or seasons. Playing a particular song in a young man's presence could convey feelings that words couldn't express. Even the arrangement of objects in a room could send messages. The placement of flowers, the choice of incense, the way tea was served, all carried significance in a culture that valued symbolism and indirect communication. Every gesture was potentially meaningful. Festivals and public gatherings offered rare opportunities for young people to see each other and exchange these subtle signals. The Qixi festival, celebrating the legendary lovers Xinu and Niulang, was particularly important. Young women would pray for skill in needlework, while young men would compose poetry, hoping their verses might reach the right ears. Letters were extremely risky, but not impossible. They had to be written in a way that appeared innocent, even if intercepted. Young people developed skills in writing messages that seemed to be about seasonal changes or family news, but contained deeper meanings for those who knew how to read between the lines. Servants sometimes played crucial roles as go-betweens. A trusted maid might carry messages or arrange for brief encounters during household tasks, but this was dangerous for everyone involved. If discovered, it could result in severe punishment for the servants and scandal for the families. The art of meaningful glances became highly refined. Young people learned to communicate volumes with brief eye contact. The length of a look, the timing of a smile, the way someone held their fan or arranged their sleeves, all carried significance in social situations. Even in group settings where conversation was possible, young people developed ways to speak in metaphors that only they understood, discussing poetry or philosophy in ways that revealed personal feelings without being overtly romantic. This system of subtle communication created a romantic atmosphere that was intense precisely because it was so constrained. Every small gesture carried weight. Every brief encounter was precious and memorable. The difficulty of communication made successful connection feel almost miraculous. And perhaps there's something to be said for this approach. In our age of instant communication, constant availability, and digital oversharing, there's something almost meditative about the idea of love as a careful, patient art form, where every word, every gesture, every gift is chosen with deliberate intention. The slowness wasn't a bug, it was a feature. It created space for anticipation, reflection, and the gradual building of emotional intimacy that couldn't be rushed or forced. Love in ancient China was like tending a garden requiring time, attention, and the faith that something beautiful would eventually bloom. When families decided that a match was suitable, the real work began. Marriage in ancient China wasn't just the joining of two young people, it was the careful negotiation and ceremonial binding of two family lines, and every detail mattered, from the exchange of gifts to the timing of the ceremony itself. The formal engagement process began with the exchange of betrothal gifts from the groom's family to the bride's. These weren't simple presents, they were carefully calculated displays of respect, wealth, and serious intention. The gifts typically included silk fabrics, jewellery, tea, wine, and sometimes livestock or property. The bride's family would reciprocate with their own gifts, often including items they'd crafted specifically for the occasion. Embroidered clothing, household goods, or personal items that demonstrated their daughter's skills and the family's investment in her education and preparation for marriage. Both families would consult fortune tellers to determine the most auspicious date for the wedding. This involved analysing the birth charts of both families, the lunar calendar, and various traditional beliefs about timing, seasons, and celestial alignments. The goal was to ensure the marriage would be blessed with good fortune. The dowry negotiations were particularly important. The bride's family needed to provide enough wealth and goods to demonstrate their daughter's value, while not bankrupting themselves. The groom's family needed to show they could provide for their new daughter-in-law appropriately. These discussions could take months. Once the practical arrangements were settled, families would begin preparing for the ceremony itself, which could last several days and involve dozens of rituals, each with specific symbolic meaning. The bride would undergo beauty preparations that could take weeks, including special diets, skincare routines, and the careful selection of wedding garments. The wedding ceremony itself was a carefully choreographed series of rituals designed to ensure the couple's compatibility, happiness, and fertility. The bride would be dressed in red, the colour of good fortune and happiness. Her hair would be arranged in a special married woman style, and she would wear jewellery provided by both families. On the wedding day, the groom would arrive at the bride's family home with a procession of friends and relatives carrying gifts and musical instruments. The bride would be formally presented to the groom's family representatives and then escorted to her new home in a decorated sedan chair or palanquin. The actual marriage ceremony involved multiple rituals, including the sharing of wine from the same cup, bowing to heaven and earth, bowing to the groom's parents, and bowing to each other. These weren't just formalities, they were sacred acts that bound the couple together, spiritually as well as legally. Feast preparations could involve entire communities, with families competing to provide the most elaborate banquet possible. The menu would include symbolic foods that represented fertility, abundance, and happiness. Items like fish for plenty, dates and peanuts for many children, and lotus seeds for continuous births. During the feast, there would be entertainment, including music, poetry recitation, and sometimes theatrical performances. The celebration was designed to be joyous but also dignified, reflecting well on both families' social standing and cultural refinement. The bride's transition to her new family was carefully managed. She would be introduced to her new relatives, receive instruction on household management, and begin the process of establishing her place in the family hierarchy. This could be challenging as she had to balance respect for her new in-laws with maintaining her own dignity. Wedding gifts from extended family, friends and community members would be carefully recorded, creating a network of social obligation and relationship that would last for generations. The marriage wasn't just creating a new household, it was strengthening the entire social fabric of the community. After the ceremony, there were additional rituals designed to ensure the marriage got off to a good start. including ceremonial visits between the families, prayers at family altars, and sometimes religious ceremonies at temples or sacred sites. The goal was to surround the new couple with as much positive energy and community support as possible. Throughout all these elaborate preparations and ceremonies, the actual feelings of the bride and groom were carefully monitored. Families wanted to ensure that their children were adapting well to the arrangement and finding ways to develop genuine affection for each other. The complexity of these arrangements served multiple purposes. It demonstrated the family's commitment to the match. It created multiple opportunities for the couple to interact and become comfortable with each other, and it established clear expectations for their future roles and responsibilities. While the process might seem overwhelming by modern standards, there was something deeply comforting about the thoroughness with which families approached this life transition. No detail was left to chance. No aspect of the couple's future together was ignored. It was love as a carefully planned architecture, rather than a spontaneous explosion. Once the ceremonies were complete and the bride had settled into her new home, the real work of marriage began. And in ancient China, this meant learning to build genuine affection within the framework of duty, family obligation, and social expectation. For many couples, the wedding day was the first time they had spent any significant time alone together. So the early weeks and months of marriage were a delicate period of getting acquainted, learning each other's habits, preferences, and personality quirks, while also adjusting to their new roles as husband and wife. The bride faced particular challenges as she navigated her position in a new household hierarchy. She had to establish relationships with her mother-in-law, sisters-in-law, and other female relatives, while also learning the specific customs and expectations of her new family. Each household had its own rhythms and traditions. Successful wives learned to read their husband's moods and preferences, while also maintaining their own dignity and sense of self. They might discover that their scholarly husband enjoyed discussing poetry in the evenings, or that he had a particular fondness for certain seasonal dishes or musical arrangements. Husbands, meanwhile, had to balance their roles as sons with their new responsibilities as married men. They might find themselves mediating between their wives and their mothers, or helping their wives understand family traditions and expectations that seemed second nature to them. Physical intimacy developed gradually within this context. Couples were expected to produce children, but the approach to marital relations was typically gentle and patient, influenced by traditional Chinese medicine's emphasis on harmony, balance, and the conservation of vital energy. Many couples found that shared activities helped build closeness. They might work together on household projects, participate in family ceremonies, or develop mutual interests in calligraphy, poetry, or music. The goal was to create companionship that would deepen over time. Seasonal celebrations provided regular opportunities for couples to bond. They would prepare special foods together, visit temples and family graves, exchange gifts, and participate in traditional activities that reinforced their connection to each other and their community. Childbearing was obviously a major focus of married life, and couples who successfully produced healthy children, especially sons, often found that this shared achievement strengthened their emotional bond. Becoming parents together created new forms of intimacy and mutual dependence. Educated couples might share intellectual pursuits, reading classical texts together, composing poetry, or engaging in philosophical discussions. These activities were seen as cultivating the mind and spirit, which was believed to improve overall harmony in the relationship. Religious and spiritual practices also played a role in building marital affection. Couples would pray together at family altars, participate in ancestor veneration ceremonies, and observe various Buddhist or Taoist practices that emphasized compassion, understanding, and interconnectedness. Over time, many arranged marriages did develop into genuine love matches. Couples learn to appreciate each other's virtues, find humour in each other's quirks, and develop the kind of deep affection that comes from shared experience and mutual support through life's challenges. The Chinese concept of love emphasized loyalty, patience, and gradual deepening rather than passionate intensity. The ideal was to build a relationship that would remain strong through decades of changing circumstances, from youth through old age and across the generations. Couples who succeeded in this process often became examples for younger family members, demonstrating through their behaviour how arranged marriages could transform into loving partnerships. Their relationships served as proof that duty and affection could coexist and reinforce each other. Of course, not all marriages developed this way. Some couples remained essentially strangers, sharing a household but little emotional intimacy. Others faced conflicts that never fully resolved, usually around issues like in-law relationships, child-rearing disagreements, or economic pressures. But the cultural emphasis on patience, gradual development, and mutual respect meant that many couples who might have given up on each other in a different context learned to find ways to coexist peacefully, and sometimes to develop genuine fondness for each other over time. The slow approach to building marital affection reflects a deeper Chinese philosophical understanding that the best relationships are like slowly maturing wine or carefully tended gardens, requiring time, patience, and consistent care rather than expecting immediate, perfect compatibility. This approach to marriage created its own kind of romance, one based on growing appreciation rather than initial attraction, on learning to love someone's character rather than being swept away by their charm, and on building something lasting rather than experiencing something intense but temporary. To understand romance and marriage in ancient China, we need to understand the complex world that women inhabited, a world of inner courtyards, silk curtains, and carefully regulated interactions where influence was wielded through indirection and power was exercised within strict boundaries. Upper-class women spent most of their lives in the inner quarters of family compounds, areas specifically designed for female family members and their servants. These weren't prisons, but they were definitely separate worlds with their own social hierarchies, activities, and rhythms. From childhood, girls were prepared for lives of domestic responsibility and social grace. They learned needlework, calligraphy, poetry, music, and household management, but they also learned more subtle skills like reading people's emotions, managing complex family relationships, and exercising influence without appearing to do so. Education for women was complex. They were often highly literate and cultured, but their learning was directed toward making them better wives, mothers, and managers of domestic life, rather than preparing them for public roles. Some women became accomplished poets or scholars, but always within the context of family life. The concept of female virtue was central to how society viewed women. The ideal woman was chaste before marriage, faithful during marriage, and devoted to her children and in-laws. She was expected to be gentle but strong, capable but not too ambitious, intelligent but not argumentative. Within these constraints, however, women often wielded considerable influence, especially as they aged and gained status within their families. Elderly women could make important decisions about marriage arrangements, family finances, and household management. They became the power behind the throne in many families. Marriage brought both restrictions and opportunities for women. They gained status as wives and especially as mothers, but they also had to navigate new family relationships, learn new household routines, and establish their place in an existing hierarchy. Motherhood was the ultimate source of female power and satisfaction, particularly giving birth to sons who would carry on the family line. Mothers developed intense relationships with their children, especially their sons, and these bonds could provide emotional fulfillment and practical influence for decades. Women's friendships were crucial for emotional support and practical assistance. Female relatives, neighbours, and friends created networks of mutual aid, sharing information about everything from medical remedies to child-rearing techniques to managing difficult in-laws. Religious and spiritual life offered another avenue for female expression. Women often had special responsibilities for ancestor worship, household shrines, and seasonal ceremonies. They might also participate in Buddhist or Taoist practices that provided opportunities for reflection and community with other women. Some women found ways to exercise creativity and even achieve a kind of fame within acceptable boundaries. They might become known for their poetry, calligraphy, painting, or musical abilities, and their work could circulate among educated families, bringing honour to their households. The most successful women learned to work within the system rather than against it. They understood that direct confrontation rarely worked, but that patient influence, persistent suggestion, and strategic alliance building could achieve their goals over time. Widowhood could actually bring increased freedom for women, especially if they had adult sons who were successful. Widows often became the senior female authority in their households, making important decisions and commanding considerable respect. Women's economic roles were also significant. They often managed household budgets, supervised servants, handled family finances, and sometimes even ran family businesses, especially in merchant families. Their economic contributions were vital, even if not always publicly acknowledged. Despite the restrictions, women found ways to express themselves and shape their world. They influenced their children's education, participated in family decision-making, maintained important social relationships, and often served as unofficial diplomats between families. The system of arranged marriage meant that women rarely had romantic choice, but it also meant they were guaranteed economic security and social status in an uncertain world. For many women, this trade-off seemed reasonable, especially when marriages developed into genuine partnerships. Women's poetry from ancient China reveals complex emotional lives filled with longing for family members, sadness at separation, joy in children's achievements, and deep appreciation for natural beauty. Their inner lives were rich even when their outer lives were constrained. Understanding women's experiences in ancient China requires recognizing both the limitations they faced and the ways they found to create meaningful lives within those limitations. They weren't passive victims, but active participants in a complex social system that offered its own forms of fulfillment and influence. Their stories remind us that human resilience and creativity can flourish even in restrictive circumstances, and that different cultures develop different ways of organising relationships and families, each with their own logic and their own capacity for both constraint and tenderness. Ancient Chinese culture was deeply connected to the rhythms of the natural world, and many of the most important romantic traditions were tied to seasonal festivals that provided rare opportunities for young people to interact and for couples to celebrate their relationships within community settings. The most important romantic festival was Qixi, also known as the Double Seventh Festival, celebrated on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month. This festival commemorated the legendary love story of Xinyu, the weaver girl, and Niulang, the cowherd, who were separated by the Milky Way and allowed to meet only once a year. According to the legend, Xinyu was a fairy who fell in love with a mortal cowherd, but their love was forbidden by the gods, so they were placed on opposite sides of the celestial river, the Milky Way only able to cross a bridge formed by magpies once each year on the 7th day of the 7th month. Young women would celebrate Qixi by praying for skill in needlework and domestic arts, believing that Xinyu would bless them with improved abilities. They would also pray for good marriages and sometimes for the opportunity to meet their destined partners. The festival became associated with the romantic wishes and matchmaking. On Qixi night, young people might participate in threading needle competitions, demonstrate their artistic skills, or compose poetry. The atmosphere was festive, but also tinged with romantic possibility as families gathered to celebrate, and young people had opportunities to see each other in a relaxed social setting. The Mid-Autumn Festival, celebrated during the full moon of the 8th lunar month, was another occasion with romantic significance. The bright full moon symbolised reunion and completeness, making it an ideal time for lovers to express their feelings and for families to celebrate marriages and engagements. Couples would often view the moon together, sharing mooncakes and composing poetry about the beauty of the night and their hopes for the future. The roundness of both the moon and the mooncakes symbolised wholeness and unity, making this a particularly auspicious time for romantic gestures. Spring festivals celebrating the renewal of life and the awakening of nature provided opportunities for families to arrange social gatherings where young people might meet. The blossoming of flowers, the return of birds, and the warming of the weather all created a romantic atmosphere that encouraged thoughts of new beginnings. The Lantern Festival, marking the end of New Year celebrations, was often particularly festive, with elaborate displays of decorated lanterns, music, and street performances. Young people might be allowed more freedom during these public celebrations, providing rare opportunities for eye contact, conversation, and the exchange of small gifts. Seasonal poetry competitions were common during festivals, with young scholars competing to compose the most beautiful verses about spring blossoms, autumn leaves, or winter snow. These competitions provided socially acceptable venues for displaying literary talent and sometimes for expressing romantic feelings through metaphor. Flower viewing expeditions during spring and autumn were popular activities for extended families and social groups. These outings to gardens, temples, or scenic areas provided opportunities for casual interaction between young people while maintaining appropriate supervision and social boundaries. Harvest festivals celebrating the abundance of autumn often included elaborate feasts and entertainment where families could display their prosperity and hospitality. These gatherings were important for maintaining social networks and sometimes for arranging introductions between eligible young people. Religious festivals honouring various deities or ancestors provided additional opportunities for community gathering. Couples might pray together for fertility, prosperity, or family harmony, and young people could observe each other's devotion and character in religious contexts. Wedding seasons were carefully chosen based on agricultural cycles, lunar calendars, and weather considerations. Spring and autumn were particularly popular as the weather was mild and food was abundant. Families would sometimes coordinate their wedding celebrations to coincide with favourable seasonal energy. Gift-giving traditions varied by season. Spring gifts might include fresh flowers or seasonal fruits. Summer gifts could be fans or cooling items. Autumn brought nuts and preserved foods, while winter called for warming items like fur accessories or hot wine. These seasonal gifts carried symbolic meanings about the giver's thoughtfulness. Many romantic traditions incorporated elements of divination or fortune-telling, particularly during festivals. Young women might perform rituals to learn about their future husbands, throw objects to determine compatibility, or participate in group activities designed to reveal romantic destiny. The integration of romance with seasonal celebration created a rhythm that connected personal relationships to larger cosmic patterns. Lovers weren't just focused on their private feelings, but on how their relationship fit into the natural order and the community's ongoing life. These seasonal traditions provided structure and meaning to romantic life, creating anticipation for special occasions, shared cultural references for expressing feelings, and community contexts that supported and celebrated loving relationships within appropriate social boundaries. The cyclical nature of seasonal festivals also reinforced the Chinese understanding of love as something that deepened over time. Like returning seasons, couples could look forward to celebrating the same festivals year after year, creating layers of shared memory and tradition. Even today, many of these ancient festivals continue to be celebrated, and their romantic associations remain strong, connecting modern lovers to thousands of years of tradition and cultural wisdom about love's connection to natural rhythms and community celebration. Romance and marriage in ancient China weren't uniform experiences. They varied dramatically depending on social class, economic status, and family circumstances, creating very different romantic worlds for peasants, merchants, scholars, and nobles, each with their own rules, expectations, and possibilities. For peasant families, survival took precedence over romance. Marriages were practical arrangements designed to combine labour resources and ensure economic stability. Young peasants might have more opportunities to interact through shared work, but less leisure time for elaborate courtship rituals. Peasant marriages were typically arranged by families, but with more input from the young people themselves. Since families couldn't afford elaborate dowries or extensive negotiations, the focus was on finding partners who were hardworking, healthy, and capable of contributing to the family's economic survival. Courtship among peasants often happened during agricultural work, seasonal festivals, or market days. Young people might meet while harvesting rice, tending animals, or participating in village celebrations. These interactions were more casual than upper-class courtship, but still carefully monitored by family members. Merchant families had unique challenges and opportunities. Their wealth allowed for more elaborate marriage negotiations, but their social status was often ambiguous. Merchants needed to balance economic considerations with social aspirations, sometimes seeking to marry into scholarly or noble families. Merchant daughters might receive education in arts and literature to make them more attractive marriage partners, while merchant sons could use their wealth to pursue scholarly studies that would improve their social standing. Marriages became opportunities for social mobility as well as economic alliance. Scholarly families placed enormous emphasis on education, literary accomplishment, and cultural refinement. Their courtship rituals were often the most elaborate, involving poetry exchanges, calligraphy demonstrations, and intellectual conversations. Marriages were seen as opportunities to combine scholarly lineages. Among scholars, romantic compatibility might include shared appreciation for literature, similar educational backgrounds, and complementary intellectual interests. Families would evaluate potential matches based on examination success, literary reputation, and scholarly achievements as much as wealth or looks. Noble families faced the most constraints and the highest stakes. Their marriages were essentially diplomatic treaties that could affect political alliances, land holdings, and family power. Young nobles had the least freedom in choosing partners, but potentially the most luxurious courtship experiences. Noble courtship might involve elaborate gift exchanges, formal poetry presentations, musical performances, and carefully choreographed social interactions. The goal was to demonstrate not just personal compatibility, but family wealth, cultural sophistication, and political wisdom. Military families developed their own traditions around honour, loyalty, and martial virtues. Their marriages often emphasised character traits like courage, discipline, and family loyalty, with less focus on artistic accomplishments and more on practical virtues like physical health and emotional stability. Regional differences also mattered significantly. Northern and southern Chinese families had different traditions. Marriage customs varied between urban and rural areas, and ethnic minorities maintained their own distinct practices, creating a complex patchwork of romantic traditions across the empire. Wealthy families, regardless of their specific social status, had more options for elaborate courtship, including hiring professional matchmakers, organising extensive social events, and providing generous dowries. Poor families made do with simpler arrangements, but often maintained strong family bonds. Urban families living in cities had different opportunities and challenges than rural families. They might have access to more cultural events, educational opportunities, and diverse social networks, but also face different economic pressures and social expectations. Religious families, whether Buddhist, Taoist, or Confucian, often incorporated spiritual considerations into their marriage arrangements, seeking partners who shared their religious values and would support their spiritual practices. These marriages might emphasize moral character over wealth or status. Artisan families developed traditions around craft skills and artistic achievements. Marriages might be arranged to combine different craft specialties or to maintain family traditions in pottery, metalworking, textile production, or other skilled trades. Despite these differences, all social classes shared certain basic values about marriage: the importance of family harmony, respect for elders, the goal of producing children, and the gradual development of affection between spouses. These underlying principles provided stability across different economic and social contexts. The diversity of marriage customs across different classes reminds us that there was no single way to experience romance in ancient China. Families adapted traditional principles to their specific circumstances, creating rich variations on common themes. Understanding these class differences helps explain why ancient Chinese literature contains such varied portrayals of love, from simple folk tales about peasant couples to elaborate court romances, each reflecting the real experiences of different social groups. This diversity also shows how flexible traditional Chinese culture could be, adapting basic principles about family, marriage, and social harmony to work in very different economic and social contexts, while maintaining core values about respect, duty, and gradually developing affection. In a culture where direct romantic expression was heavily restricted, poetry and art became the primary vehicles for exploring and communicating feelings of love, longing, and desire. Ancient Chinese artists and writers developed incredibly sophisticated ways of expressing emotional complexity through metaphor, symbolism, and aesthetic beauty. Chinese poetry has always been deeply intertwined with romantic feeling, from the earliest collected works like the Book of Songs, which includes love ballads and courtship poems, to the later classical poems of the Tang and Song dynasties that elevated romantic longing to high art. Poets learned to use natural imagery as emotional metaphor. Spring blossoms represented new love, autumn leaves suggested separation and loss, flowing water symbolized the passage of time and changing feelings. Mountains and clouds became symbols of obstacles between lovers, while bright moonlight represented hope and connection. The plum blossom became particularly significant in romantic poetry. Blooming in late winter, when other flowers had died, it symbolized perseverance, faithfulness, and beauty that endures through difficult circumstances. Lovers would exchange poems about plum blossoms as declarations of their commitment. Birds were another common romantic symbol. Paired birds like mandarin ducks represented faithful couples, while solitary birds expressed loneliness and longing. Migratory birds that returned seasonally symbolized hope for reunion, while caged birds might represent feelings of romantic constraint. Calligraphy itself became a form of romantic expression. The way someone formed their characters, their choice of ink and paper, the style and rhythm of their brushwork, all conveyed personality and emotion. Receiving a handwritten poem was intimate because it contained traces of the writer's physical presence. Painting provided another avenue for romantic communication. Artists might paint scenes of beautiful women in gardens, couples separated by rivers or mountains, or seasonal landscapes that evoked particular emotional states. These paintings could be given as gifts or displayed where specific people might see them. Music and dance also played important roles in romantic expression. Certain melodies were associated with love songs, and young women who mastered these pieces could perform them as subtle declarations of their feelings. Musical skill was considered an essential feminine accomplishment. The art of flower arrangement became highly refined, with different combinations of flowers, herbs, and branches carrying specific symbolic meanings. A carefully arranged bouquet could communicate complex messages about the arranger's feelings, intentions, and hopes for the future. Silk embroidery offered women a particularly important means of artistic expression. They would embroider clothing, household items, and decorative pieces with patterns that carried romantic significance. The choice of colours, motifs, and stitching techniques all contributed to the emotional message. Fan painting became a specialised art form with romantic implications. Beautifully painted fans could be given as gifts or used to communicate during social gatherings. The images chosen for fans often contained romantic symbolism, while the act of sharing or borrowing a fan created opportunities for subtle interaction. Garden design incorporated romantic principles, with winding paths, hidden pavilions, and carefully placed flowering trees that created intimate spaces for contemplation and hopefully chance encounters. The aesthetics of Chinese gardens were designed to evoke emotional responses, including romantic feelings. Incense burning became associated with a romantic atmosphere. Different fragrances were believed to create different moods and emotions. Lovers might use particular incenses to create memorable sensory associations that would evoke feelings even when they were apart. Jade carving reached extraordinary levels of refinement, with small jade pieces becoming popular romantic gifts. The choice of jade colour, the complexity of carving, and the symbolic meaning of the carved images all contributed to the romantic message. Jade was believed to have protective properties, making it especially meaningful between lovers. Bookbinding and illustration became art forms that could carry romantic significance. Beautifully bound books of poetry could be given as gifts, while illustrated manuscripts might contain images that conveyed romantic messages. The act of sharing books created intellectual intimacy between lovers. Seasonal decorations in homes and gardens provided opportunities for romantic expression. Families might arrange their living spaces with particular attention to creating beautiful environments that would enhance romantic feelings during visits or family gatherings. The integration of romantic expression with traditional art forms meant that love became part of the broader cultural landscape, rather than being confined to private, personal experience. Romantic feelings were celebrated and explored through the highest forms of artistic achievement. This artistic approach to romance created a rich cultural vocabulary for expressing love that was both deeply personal and widely shared. Lovers could draw on centuries of poetic tradition, artistic symbolism, and aesthetic knowledge to communicate their feelings in sophisticated, beautiful ways. The emphasis on artistic expression also meant that romantic relationships were seen as opportunities for cultural refinement and spiritual development. Love wasn't just about personal satisfaction, but about cultivating beauty, wisdom, and emotional sophistication that enhanced all aspects of life. Even today, Chinese artistic traditions continue to carry romantic associations, and many of the symbols and metaphors developed in ancient times remain meaningful to contemporary lovers, creating continuity between past and present understandings of love, beauty, and artistic expression. Ancient China was never a monolithic culture, but rather a vast empire, encompassing dozens of different ethnic groups, regional traditions, and local customs that created fascinating variations in how romance, marriage, and family relationships were understood and practiced across different communities. In the mountainous regions of Western China, Tibetan and other highland peoples developed marriage customs that differed significantly from Han Chinese traditions. Their harsh environment and nomadic lifestyle created different priorities around partnership, survival, and family structure. Tibetan marriage customs often allowed for more flexibility in partner choice, particularly among pastoral communities where young people had more opportunities to interact during seasonal migrations and religious festivals. Their Buddhist beliefs also influenced their approach to relationships, emphasizing compassion and spiritual compatibility. In the southern regions near present-day Vietnam and Myanmar, various ethnic minorities like the Zhuang, Miao and Yao peoples maintained distinct courtship traditions that often included elaborate festivals, singing competitions, and ritual exchanges that were quite different from the formal arranged marriages common among Han Chinese families. Some southern communities practiced forms of trial marriage, where young couples could live together temporarily before making permanent commitments. This allowed families to evaluate compatibility while giving young people more agency in their romantic choices than was typical in mainstream Chinese society. The Dai people of southwestern China developed particularly beautiful courtship rituals centered around water festivals, where young people could interact freely, splash water on each other as flirtatious gestures, and exchange small gifts without the heavy supervision common in other regions. Nomadic peoples along China's northern and western borders, including various Mongol and Turkic groups, maintained marriage traditions that emphasized mobility, practicality, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Their courtship rituals often involved demonstrations of riding skills, wrestling, and other practical abilities. Coastal communities developed their own traditions, influenced by their connection to maritime trade and fishing. These communities often had more contact with foreign cultures and sometimes adopted marriage customs that blended Chinese traditions with influences from Southeast Asia, Japan, or Central Asia. In regions where Buddhism was particularly strong, monastic communities influenced local marriage customs with emphasis on spiritual compatibility, meditation practices, and religious observance. Couples might include religious ceremonies in their weddings or seek guidance from respected monks or nuns. Taoist influences were stronger in certain mountainous regions, leading to marriage customs that emphasized harmony with nature, seasonal timing based on Taoist principles, and sometimes the incorporation of Taoist rituals into wedding ceremonies. These marriages often included elements of folk magic and nature worship. Urban centres like Chang'an, Beijing, and Nanjing developed their own sophisticated courtship cultures, influenced by imperial court traditions, scholarly communities, and the mixing of people from different regions. These cities often had more elaborate and formal marriage customs. Border regions where Chinese settlers mixed with indigenous populations often developed hybrid marriage customs that combined elements from different cultural traditions. These communities sometimes had more flexibility in their arrangements as they adapted to local conditions and intercultural relationships. Some regions maintained strong clan systems that influenced marriage patterns, with certain areas preferring marriages within specific clan networks, while others encouraged marriages between different clans to strengthen political and economic alliances across family lines. Religious minorities, including Christians, Zoroastrians, and various folk religions, maintained their own marriage traditions within the broader Chinese cultural context. These communities often had to balance their religious requirements with Chinese social expectations. Mountain communities often developed traditions around seasonal marriage ceremonies, Taking advantage of particular times of year when travel was easier, communities could gather, and multiple families could arrange marriages simultaneously, creating festival-like celebrations. River communities built traditions around water symbolism, including ceremonies that involved crossing rivers together, sharing water from sacred sources, or incorporating boat rides into courtship and wedding rituals. These water-based traditions emphasized flow, change, and adaptation. Agricultural regions developed marriage customs closely tied to farming cycles, with weddings timed around planting and harvest seasons, courtship rituals that involved shared agricultural work, and marriage arrangements that considered land ownership and farming skills as primary compatibility factors. Trading communities along the Silk Road developed particularly cosmopolitan marriage customs influenced by contact with Persian, Arab, Central Asian, and other foreign cultures. These communities often had more diverse courtship practices and sometimes more flexible attitudes toward intercultural marriage. Ethnic minorities in remote areas often maintained ancient marriage traditions that predated Chinese influence, including matrilineal systems where inheritance passed through women, bride price customs different from Chinese dowry traditions, and courtship rituals based on local spiritual beliefs. The diversity of marriage customs across different regions and ethnic groups demonstrates the complexity of Chinese civilization and challenges any simplified understanding of how romance and marriage worked in ancient China. Each community adapted basic human needs for partnership and family to their specific environment and cultural background. This regional diversity also shows how adaptable Chinese culture could be, absorbing influences from neighbouring peoples while maintaining certain core values about family, respect, and social harmony. The result was a rich tapestry of romantic traditions rather than a single uniform system. Understanding these variations helps us appreciate that ancient Chinese people experienced love and marriage in many different ways, depending on where they lived, what ethnic group they belonged to, and what specific historical circumstances shaped their communities. While the idealized vision of arranged marriage emphasized gradual affection and family harmony, the reality was often more complicated, with couples facing significant challenges as they tried to build relationships within a system that prioritized duty over personal compatibility. One of the most common sources of conflict was the relationship between wives and mothers-in-law. The mother-in-law held significant authority over household management and child rearing, and new wives had to learn to navigate this hierarchy while establishing their own identity within the family. Generational differences in values and expectations could create ongoing tension. Older family members might have very traditional ideas about proper behaviour, while younger couples might be influenced by new ideas about relationships, education, or social change. These differences had to be negotiated carefully. Economic pressures often strained marriages, particularly during times of war, famine, or political instability. Families that had seemed prosperous during marriage negotiations might face financial difficulties that changed the dynamics of the relationship and created stress for the couple. Personality conflicts that weren't apparent during brief courtship meetings could become major issues once couples began living together. Differences in temperament, habits, communication styles, or interests that seemed minor initially could become sources of ongoing frustration and disappointment. Health problems, including mental illness, physical disabilities, or fertility issues, could severely impact arranged marriages. Couples had little opportunity to learn about each other's health before marriage, and discovering serious problems afterward could create both practical and emotional challenges. Political changes could affect marriages, particularly for noble families whose marriages were connected to political alliances. Changes in government favour, family fortunes, or regional power could put pressure on marriages that had been arranged based on different circumstances. Education gaps between spouses sometimes created difficulties, particularly when one partner was significantly more educated or cultured than the other. These differences could lead to communication problems, different social expectations, and feelings of incompatibility that were difficult to resolve. Religious or philosophical differences that weren't apparent during marriage arrangements could become problematic, particularly during times of religious change, or when families converted to different belief systems. Couples might find themselves with fundamentally different worldviews. Geographic separation due to military service, official positions, or family obligations could put stress on arranged marriages. Couples who are still learning to know each other might find long separations particularly difficult without the foundation of established emotional intimacy. Infertility was a particularly serious challenge since producing children, especially sons, was a primary expectation of marriage. Couples who couldn't have children faced family pressure, social stigma, and sometimes the threat of divorce or the husband taking additional wives. Addiction problems, including gambling, drinking, or other compulsive behaviours, could devastate arranged marriages. These issues might not become apparent until after marriage, and families often had limited resources for addressing such problems once they developed. Domestic violence was a serious issue that was often hidden from extended family members. Women who faced abusive husbands had limited options for escape or protection, particularly if their birth families were unwilling or unable to intervene on their behalf. Mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, or more serious conditions, were poorly understood and often stigmatized. Couples dealing with mental health challenges had little support or understanding from their families or communities. Some couples simply never developed affection for each other despite years of shared life. They might maintain a functional household and raise children together, but remain essentially strangers without emotional intimacy or companionship. Adultery was another source of marriage conflict that could destroy family relationships and social standing. When one spouse developed romantic feelings for someone outside the marriage, it created complex problems involving honour, reputation, and family loyalty. Financial disagreements about household management, family obligations, or business decisions could create ongoing conflict, particularly when spouses came from families with different attitudes toward money, spending, and financial responsibility. Child-rearing disagreements could become serious sources of conflict, particularly when couples had different ideas about education, discipline, religious instruction, or arranged marriages for their own children. These conflicts affected not just the couple, but future generations. Despite these challenges, many families developed strategies for helping couples work through difficulties. These included family mediation, involving respected elders, seeking guidance from religious or philosophical teachers, and sometimes arranging temporary separations to allow conflicts to cool down. The expectation that marriages would last for life meant that families had strong incentives to help couples resolve their problems, rather than giving up on relationships. The social and economic costs of marriage failure were high enough that most people preferred to find ways to make arrangements work. Successful resolution of marriage conflicts often became sources of family pride, and stories of couples who overcame initial difficulties to build strong relationships were celebrated as examples of the value of patience, persistence, and family wisdom. Understanding these challenges helps us appreciate that arranged marriage wasn't always easy or successful for ancient Chinese couples, but also that many people found ways to build meaningful relationships despite the constraints and difficulties they faced. The conflicts and challenges of arranged marriage also led to gradual changes in marriage customs over time, as families learned from experience and adapted their practices to better support successful relationships. Chinese attitudes toward romance and marriage didn't remain static over the thousands of years of recorded history, but evolved constantly in response to changing political conditions, economic developments, religious influences, and contact with other cultures, creating a complex story of gradual transformation. During the earliest periods of Chinese civilization, around the Shang and Zhou dynasties, marriage customs were closely tied to clan structures and political alliances, with elaborate rituals designed to ensure fertility, prosperity, and the continuation of family lines. These early marriages were primarily political and economic arrangements. The introduction and spread of Confucian philosophy during the spring and autumn period significantly influenced marriage customs by emphasizing filial piety, social hierarchy, and the importance of family harmony. Confucian ideals shaped expectations about spousal roles, particularly the subordination of wives to husbands and daughters-in-law to mothers-in-law. Buddhism's arrival in China during the Han Dynasty brought new ideas about compassion, individual spiritual development, and the possibility of choosing celibate religious life over marriage. Buddhist concepts of karma and reincarnation also influenced how people thought about romantic relationships and marital compatibility. The Tang Dynasty marked a period of greater openness and cultural exchange that influenced marriage customs. Contact with Central Asian and Middle Eastern cultures through the Silk Road brought new ideas about women's roles, romantic expression, and marriage arrangements. During the Tang period, some women enjoyed relatively high status and freedom, including the remarkable Empress Wu Zetian, who ruled in her own right. This period saw more flexible attitudes toward divorce, remarriage, and women's participation in public life. The Song Dynasty brought economic prosperity and cultural refinement that influenced courtship and marriage customs. The growth of urban centres, increased literacy, and the development of printing technology spread romantic literature and poetry to broader audiences. Song period innovations included more elaborate wedding ceremonies, increased emphasis on romantic love in literature, and the development of new artistic forms for expressing romantic feelings. The period also saw the unfortunate spread of foot binding, which severely limited women's mobility. The Yuan dynasty under Mongol rule brought different cultural influences to Chinese marriage customs. The Mongols had their own traditions about marriage and family relationships, and their period of rule created interesting cultural hybridizations and adaptations. The Ming dynasty saw both conservative reactions that emphasized traditional Chinese values and continued evolution in marriage customs. The period included increased emphasis on female chastity and virtue, but also continued development of romantic literature and artistic expression. During the Qing dynasty, China faced increasing contact with Western cultures through trade and missionary activity. These encounters began to introduce new ideas about individual choice, romantic love, and marriage arrangements, though traditional customs remained dominant. Throughout these historical periods, economic factors continuously influenced marriage customs. Periods of prosperity allowed for more elaborate ceremonies and courtship rituals, while times of hardship forced families to focus on practical survival considerations. Urbanization gradually changed how people met and married. As more families lived in cities rather than rural agricultural communities, the opportunities for chance encounters increased, while traditional rural courtship customs had to adapt to new circumstances. Literacy rates slowly increased over time, particularly among women, and this had significant impacts on romantic communication. As more people could read and write, poetry, letters, and other forms of romantic expression became more common and sophisticated. Technological innovations like printing, papermaking, and improved transportation gradually changed how romantic literature spread, how families communicated across distances, and how marriage arrangements could be negotiated between distant communities. Regional variations became more pronounced over time as different areas of China developed distinct local customs while maintaining connection to broader Chinese cultural traditions. This created rich diversity in marriage and courtship practices across the empire. Religious changes, including the periodic persecution of Buddhism, the rise of new folk religions, and the influence of foreign religions, all contributed to evolving attitudes toward marriage, spirituality, and the role of religious considerations in romantic relationships. Political changes, including periods of unity and division, foreign invasions, and civil wars, all affected marriage customs by disrupting traditional patterns, forcing population movements, and creating new economic and social conditions. The gradual development of examination systems and bureaucratic government created new forms of social mobility that influenced marriage patterns as scholarly families gained prominence and new opportunities for advancement through education rather than birth. Contact with foreign cultures through trade, diplomacy, and warfare continuously introduced new ideas and practices that were selectively adopted and adapted to fit Chinese cultural frameworks, creating ongoing evolution in marriage customs. By understanding these historical changes, we can see that Chinese marriage and romance traditions were never fixed or unchanging, but represented ongoing adaptations to changing circumstances, while maintaining certain core values about family harmony, social stability, and gradual affection. This historical perspective also helps us understand that many practices that seem ancient and traditional actually developed relatively recently in response to specific historical circumstances, and that Chinese culture has always been dynamic and adaptive rather than rigidly traditional. The ancient Chinese approach to romance and marriage created lasting influences that continue to shape relationships and family life not just in China, but throughout East Asia and among Chinese communities worldwide. These traditional patterns have evolved and adapted, but their core principles remain recognizable. The emphasis on family involvement in marriage decisions continues in many contemporary Chinese families, though young people now typically have much more input into the process. Modern matchmaking often combines traditional family networks with new technologies like dating apps and professional matchmaking services. The gradual approach to building romantic relationships that characterized ancient Chinese marriage has influenced contemporary attitudes toward dating and courtship. Many Chinese families still emphasize the importance of getting to know someone's character and family background before making serious commitments. Traditional Chinese wedding ceremonies continue to incorporate many ancient elements, including the use of red decorations, tea ceremonies honoring parents and relatives, and the exchange of symbolic gifts. These rituals maintain connections to thousands of years of cultural tradition. The Chinese zodiac and traditional beliefs about astrological compatibility remain popular in modern matchmaking. Many couples still consult fortune tellers or use traditional methods to determine whether their birth years and personal characteristics make them compatible partners. Filial piety and respect for elders continue to influence modern Chinese relationships, with many couples considering parental approval and family harmony as important factors in their romantic decisions. The balance between individual choice and family wishes remains a significant consideration. The traditional emphasis on education and cultural refinement as attractive qualities in marriage partners has evolved into contemporary preferences for well-educated, professionally successful partners who can appreciate art, literature, and cultural traditions. Chinese romantic poetry and artistic traditions continue to influence how people express their feelings. Many contemporary Chinese couples draw on classical poetry, natural imagery, and traditional symbols to communicate their emotions and create romantic atmosphere. The concept of guanxi, or relationship networks, that was so important in traditional marriage arrangements, continues to play a role in modern Chinese society. Many people still meet potential partners through family friends, colleague introductions, and social networks. Traditional gender roles have evolved significantly, but some influences persist in expectations about family responsibilities, household management, and the importance of harmony between couples. These traditional ideals continue to shape relationship dynamics. The Chinese emphasis on long-term thinking and gradual relationship development influences contemporary attitudes toward marriage. Many Chinese couples approach marriage as a life partnership, requiring patience, compromise, and mutual growth rather than just romantic passion. Traditional festivals like Qixi continue to be celebrated as romantic occasions, with modern couples adapting ancient customs to contemporary circumstances. These festivals maintain cultural connections while allowing for creative new expressions of love. Chinese concepts of balance, harmony, and complementarity that influence traditional marriage continue to influence how people think about ideal relationships. The idea that partners should balance each other's strengths and weaknesses remains popular. The traditional integration of spiritual and practical considerations in marriage has evolved into contemporary interests in both emotional compatibility and practical compatibility, including financial stability, career compatibility, and shared life goals. Many overseas Chinese communities maintain traditional elements in their approach to romance and marriage, creating interesting blends of ancient customs with local cultural influences. These adaptations show how traditional principles can be maintained while adjusting to new circumstances. Contemporary Chinese literature, film, and popular culture continue to explore themes of arranged marriage, family expectations, and the tension between individual desires and social obligations. These artistic works show how ancient issues remain relevant. The traditional Chinese understanding of love as something that develops over time rather than striking suddenly has influenced therapeutic approaches to relationships and marriage counseling in Chinese communities, emphasizing patience, understanding, and gradual emotional development. Modern Chinese wedding industries draw heavily on traditional symbolism, colors, and customs while incorporating contemporary elements, creating ceremonies that honor the past while celebrating present relationships. The ancient Chinese emphasis on family networks and community support for marriages has influenced contemporary approaches to relationship support, with many couples seeking guidance from extended family members and community elders when facing challenges. Traditional Chinese medicine's approaches to fertility, sexual health, and emotional balance continue to influence how some couples approach the physical and emotional aspects of their relationships. Blending ancient wisdom with modern medical knowledge, the Chinese concept of face or reputation that was so important in traditional marriage arrangements continues to influence how couples present their relationships publicly and how families respond to relationship challenges and successes. Educational institutions in Chinese communities often teach traditional values about relationships and marriage alongside modern relationship skills, helping young people understand their cultural heritage while preparing them for contemporary relationship challenges. Understanding these modern connections helps us see that ancient Chinese approaches to romance and marriage weren't just historical curiosities, but living traditions that continue to evolve and influence millions of people's lives today. The persistence of these traditional influences also demonstrates the enduring appeal of approaches to love and marriage that emphasize gradual development, family support, cultural continuity, and the integration of practical and emotional considerations in building lasting relationships. As we reach the end of our journey through the courtyards and gardens of ancient Chinese romance, it's worth reflecting on what these stories of arranged marriages, poetry exchanges, and seasonal festivals might teach us about love, patience, and the art of building lasting relationships. Ancient Chinese culture approached romance with a fundamentally different philosophy than our contemporary emphasis on instant attraction and individual choice. They believed that love was something that could be cultivated like a garden, requiring time, patience, and the right conditions to flourish properly. This patient approach to love created space for relationships to develop naturally, without the pressure of immediate passion or perfect compatibility. Couples learned to appreciate each other's character, to find humour in each other's quirks, and to build the kind of deep affection that comes from shared experience and mutual support. The involvement of families and communities in romantic relationships might seem restrictive to modern sensibilities, but it also provided couples with extensive support networks, guidance from experienced elders, and the wisdom that comes from collective decision-making about life's most important choices. The emphasis on subtle communication and artistic expression elevated romance to a cultural art form where lovers learned to appreciate beauty, poetry, music, and symbolic meaning. These skills enriched not just romantic relationships, but entire lives, creating people who could find deep satisfaction in aesthetic and cultural experiences. The integration of practical and emotional considerations in marriage arrangements recognized that successful, long-term relationships require more than just romantic feelings. They need compatible life goals, shared values, mutual respect, and the ability to work together through life's inevitable challenges. The seasonal rhythms and festival cycles that structured romantic life created anticipation, celebration, and renewal opportunities. Couples could look forward to special occasions that would refresh their relationships and connect their personal love to larger cosmic and cultural patterns. The diversity of customs across different regions, social classes, and ethnic groups reminds us that there's no single correct way to approach love and marriage. Each culture develops its own wisdom about relationships, and there's much to be learned from different approaches. The challenges and conflicts that ancient Chinese couples faced weren't so different from modern relationship problems. Managing family relationships, balancing individual needs with partner needs, dealing with economic pressures, and learning to communicate effectively across differences. The gradual historical evolution of Chinese marriage customs shows that even traditional cultures are constantly adapting and changing in response to new circumstances. This flexibility and adaptability may be as important as any specific custom or practice. Perhaps most importantly, the ancient Chinese understanding of love as something that grows deeper over time, rather than burning brightest at the beginning, offers a different model for thinking about romantic relationships, one that emphasizes development rather than discovery. In our age of rapid change, instant communication, and endless choice, there's something deeply appealing about the ancient Chinese approach to love. With its emphasis on patience, gradual development, family wisdom, and the belief that the best relationships are built slowly, like fine wine or carefully tended gardens. The stories of ancient Chinese lovers, separated by family obligations, communicating through poetry, and building affection within arranged marriages, remind us that human hearts have always found ways to love deeply, regardless of the social structures surrounding them. Their emphasis on harmony, balance, and mutual cultivation created relationships that were designed to last not just through the excitement of early romance, but through decades of changing circumstances, from youth through old age and across generations. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can imagine yourself in one of those ancient Chinese gardens where lovers once exchanged glances across tea ceremonies, where poetry was written by moonlight, and where patience and artistic beauty combined to create a different kind of romance. Let the wisdom of those ancient hearts remind you that love in all its forms requires patience, that the best relationships are often those that develop slowly, and that there's beauty in approaching romance as a cultural art form worthy of our highest creativity and most careful attention. The gentle rhythms of ancient Chinese courtship, with their emphasis on seasonal celebration, family wisdom, and gradual emotional development, offer us a different pace, a different set of values, and perhaps a different kind of wisdom about what makes love last. So close your eyes and let these stories of arranged marriages turn to deep affection, poetry exchanges across forbidden boundaries, and festival celebrations of lasting love carry you into peaceful sleep, with the knowledge that human hearts have always found ways to create beauty, meaning, and connection. Sleep well, knowing that love in all its forms has always been both patient and passionate, both practical and poetic, both challenging and deeply rewarding, and that the wisdom of ancient lovers continues to whisper to us across the centuries about the eternal human art of learning to love well.